and charades.
We fight a lot more than just some computers crashing. Let's get it.
Name something hip hop is not. Silent. Hip hop was never known to keep quiet because clearly we continue to keep making noise in the studio, on stages, even in the streets. So why would we stop the streak at the ballot box where we need to be heard the most? Hip hop is an industry where we profit off our voice like a modern age prophet cashes out on being a psychic. So we cannot afford to be silent when it comes to our vote. But the ballot of our ballot must be seen by the world like a Super Bowl halftime show, minus the timeouts. Taking another break will only make the time run out. We are to get in the game and focus on the touchdowns, make the play instead of watching the commercials. There's no time to play. Cut the act. Stop being a playwright. I refuse to be a character acting in charades and make people guess how I feel when I should grab the blue or black pen. There's holes I need to fill. How could I be filled with rage about the people in office when I never felt the need to place a vote to select someone I would prefer to have their place? America, we're too out of place when an opportunity to have a choice was placed in our hands that others are not in the place to receive. Please don't shut your mouths. I'm gonna tell the engineer to give me a little more, not on my headphones, but on my speakers. This needs to be heard on the field and in the bleachers, louder than a Sunday service. Call me a preacher, dropping my couple of bars with no mic drop either. I'm still turning up. So when it comes to the polls, are you turning up? Election day is soon and y'all ain't turned enough, but hip hop will be heard at the polls. Turned down for what?
That was powerful, everybody. This is Rev here with President and founder of the Hip Hop Caucus, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for hanging with us. I want to thank our team for overcoming the glitches. But you know what? I was saying this in the green room with the other amazing panelists you're going to hear from shortly, that the motto of hip hop is still the same: can't stop, won't stop. But also spiritually, it hit me that was also a reminder that even though the election was over, people's light bills and phone bills are still being cut off. And the way that we were able to jump from one platform to another to reconnect to you, a lot of them are dealing with this reality in our community, that their phone was cut off and their light was cut off and their power was cut off. And this first of the month, these 10 days in, don't mean that 10 days good for a lot of our community. So sometimes you need to be reminded of the plight of our people who's struggling from the suites to the streets. You also be reminded of where we came from as a movement and how we're still holding up the legacy of our ancestors who died this year. So many of them, from C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, who passed on to across the Jordan to remind us of what this moment is. And no matter who's in office in that political process to shape policy, and please beware, we will have a discussion because we know either you shape policy or policy shapes you. We're clear on that. And we're clear on this culture called hip hop that was born in the Bronx and has now, it is where it is today. But even in spite of that, we are still mindful of our people who are suffering. And so we come to them because we know the policies of white supremacists and institutionalized racism kills our people. Between dirty water and dirty air, it kills our people. To transportation issues, moving bus stops, it kills our people. We know that so many things that rolling back, increasing the rent fees and the housing markets where Ben Carson was, or creating unfair schools where Betsy DeVos was. We know that causes trauma. So the question is, how do we use our cultural expression to shape our political experience? I've been in hip hop for a long time, y'all. I've been there when this thing first started. I took Missy Elliott to the polls. I was there with Queen Latifah when it was Rap the Vote back in 2000. I was there with Russell, and I was there with Diddy to co-create Vote or Die. And I can tell you that what I've seen now, I'm so excited now to see hip hop being taken seriously. And I want to lead with this, because we understand when the Hip Hop Caucus was first started, it was started because we loved the name of the Congressional Black Caucus. So we said, well, dang, why not? That's cool as it could be. Caucus, Hip Hop Caucus. But when we went to the Congressional Black Caucus in 2004, it's like Jesus, there was no room in the inn. Facts. Our people who were there were afraid of us and said we couldn't participate. So we had to go down the street to Howard University to have our first meeting. So please be clear. I'm so glad now. I mean, on both sides, I'm glad to see folks hanging with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. I'm not saying I was excited to be with Trump, but it's a reality. That's how far it's come. But now we need to have a conversation that where do we go from here? Community or chaos? And so I want to have a conversation now with a variety of perspectives from an esteemed panel. I'm going to bring on Bree, Marsha, and Jason. Let me give their intros to bring them in because they are all fantastic. And again, I want to thank them for what they do so we can begin to have this conversation. First, my dear sister, actually, who I admire so much because she is so courageous. Bree Newsom Bass is an artist, activist, public speaker, and organizer in the modern civil rights movement, who is best known for her act of civil disobedience in 2015 when she scaled a flagpole at South Carolina's Capitol building to remove the Confederate flag in protest, stemming racism following the racially motivated murders at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. She is an organizer extraordinaire in the modern civil rights movement and has helped develop several nonprofit and grassroots organizations. Her artistic work includes written, film, and performance pieces. She is the recipient of an NAACP Image Award, among other honors. So without further ado, first, let me bring in Bree Newsom. Second, Marsha Gosseher is a rural organizer and special projects manager for the Partnership for Southern Equity. She was born in East Point, Georgia, and very proud to be from Fort Valley, Georgia. I'm a Southerner too, so I kind of like that. I'm from Louisiana, y'all. So she is a child of hip hop and a lover of the culture, an organizer by nature, social justice writer, influencer, and political strategist. Marsha uses her passion and time to ensure racial equity through an environmental justice, economic, and political development lens. So give it up for Marsha, y'all. Next, we're going to have Jason Starr, who has over a decade of experience as an attorney, educator, organizer, and innovator in civil rights and social justice policy. Currently, Jason is the inaugural director of litigation at the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization, where he is building a strategic hub for collaborative impact litigation with 7 of the largest law firms in the world. Formerly, Jason served as counsel for civil rights and federal affairs to Governor Andrew Cuomo, where he managed legal and policy affairs for a portfolio of issues, including criminal justice, clemency, democracy protection, immigration, and housing. Jason was also counsel to both the governor's task force on reentry and community reintegration, and the Joint Task Force on Worker Exploitation and Employee Misclassification. Jason is just an amazing, and we all know how important it is because demonstration without litigation leads to frustration. So without further ado, Bree, Marsha, Jason, how are y'all doing this evening?
Doing okay. Really glad to be here, have this conversation with everyone. I feel empowered, and I feel that's how a lot of people are feeling right now.
Well, that's good. Marsha, you there? How you feeling? This is also a old-fashioned mic check too.
Feeling great, Reverend Yearwood. Can you hear me?
I can hear you good now.
Okay. Are you able to see me?
I can't see you though, but I think that I can see you. I can see you.
Really? Okay. Well,
No, I can't.
But you can hear me, so that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's the most important thing.
Okay.
There it is. And Jason, how you doing this evening?
I'm blessed. Grateful to be here. Always happy to be in solidarity. And even though I live in New York City, I'm a son of the South myself. I grew up in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So, Bree, I know exactly what you scaled, both figuratively and literally. So it's a blessing to be with you and Marcia, and of course you, Reverend Yearwood, and everyone watching.
Well, let's get right to it. I'm gonna start with Bree. I'm actually all three of you. This is one. How do you define hip hop politics? But I also want to get into Bree and Jason and Marcia. I wanted y'all to also think about what just happened from your perspective, what from your lens, what happened from the standpoint of those two things of hip hop and politics. So, Bree, I know you've been hitting it hard and you've been something alarmed in, my friend. So let me let you get started with that first.
Yeah, sure. Hip hop is of course just fascinating as a cultural phenomenon. I think about the origins of hip hop, coming about like in the late 70s and 80s, and hip hop has actually, like, the rise of hip hop has corresponded with the rise of Trump in a lot of ways too, which I think is really kind of interesting. And this ongoing, dialogue within the hip hop community around some of these tensions between things like capitalism and patriarchy, and hip hop also being a very revolutionary force against some of those very things. Like, I think some of the conversation that we have seen recently, even, in some of this discussion over some famous rappers, right? and where they're landing politically and what they're speaking about. And, people having some questions around what does that say about where hip hop is at, I think is not anything new. I think that is in the tradition of it. I think that we are clearly at this point of, Black political power. Not that that is a completely new thing, but I do think that what we have seen recently in this election is, again, kind of like the culmination of like the shifting demographics in this country, and the fact that our power is really translating to shifting the political landscape in some very concrete ways. Obviously that was present in the election of Obama, but even more so now in some ways. I mean, I think that what's happening in the South is really significant. And I think that's why there's like a lot of focus on, places like Georgia in particular, and kind of what is going on there and what does that mean about, the future of things. At the same time, yes, I am raising a lot of alarms, because I think that we have to also be aware of the backlash that has always accompanied it and that we're seeing right now. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we are looking at a situation where you have a candidate who has won the most votes in history. It's not even a close election. It's really not. And the opposition is still refusing to concede the race. That's never happened before. But what has happened before is that anytime we see evidence of Black people really seizing on a lot of power, or, it becomes apparent that we are exercising political power, that we are voting, that we are participating in the process, we have often been met with backlash. And I don't think that people are being hyperbolic in any kind of way, and making sure that folks don't let their guard down around that, and saying that we need to take that very seriously. So I think it's a time of empowerment, a lot of excitement. We also got to be, very careful. I don't want to scare folks, and I don't want us to shy away from the power that we're seizing upon in this moment, but we've got to be historically aware.
No, that's real. And I have a follow-up question too, but I want to get in Marcia and Jason. Marcia, Jason, same question for you. Marcia, you go ahead.
Well, you spoke on one thing. I totally hate, I can't be seen, but I can see you all. You can hear me. You spoke on one thing about the definition of hip hop politics and speaking truth to power. Taking that a step further, calling a thing a thing. That's what, hip hop has always been about, the boldness of it. The irony, as you mentioned, that it started, up north in Brooklyn, in New York, and it has now trickled down south. And we are seeing where, Andre foreshadowed and said, hey, the South has something to say. And we have shown that. We have proven that we have established political equity. And we most definitely need to start with a set tone, a set demand going forward in 2020 and 2021 and beyond. So we have equity. We need to go ahead and cash in those ships and get some things going.
I agree with that. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I'd add, just to circle back to, what you started with, Rev, that politics of resilience. I think that hip hop is created a space for a politic where we have been dislocated and disengaged by, the political institutions. And so, as we have gotten further and further away from those institutions in power, and as those institutions have gotten further and further away from the realities of those of us who are most vulnerable, Black folks, brown folks, queer folks who sit at the intersections of all those margins. I see hip hop politic as asserting itself in this moment, right? We saw in the face of hundreds of thousands of people dead, rising cases of the coronavirus, lack of action by federal and some state and local governments, Black and brown folks show up in numbers that we have never seen before, in a repudiation of the bigotry and the hatred that Trump and Trumpism represents and idealizes. And so I see possibility in, not just what we did with turning out in resilience this presidential election cycle, but the potential for that to be a real infrastructure of accountability. Because it's not just what we collectively defeated at the polls this year, but it's also about that accountability that we're going to have to exercise for what we voted for. Because for so many of us, that radical freedom doesn't lie anywhere in the institution. And if we're going to see that reality, we're going to have to take what we did, build on it, and construct that as a politics of possibility in the institutions that actually carry out that, that power.
No, that's well put, Jason. Actually, so Bree, I want to come to you, Bree, because you are a storyteller. You use film. I know you actually went to school up there in New York, and so you use film to tell the story, so you can get that across. And that's what. And I want to kind of take a step back. I believe that when the movement is strong, the music is strong. But when the movement is weak, the music is weak. That also goes into the art, the film, the poetry as well. I think when the movement is strong, it has an impact. And so for me, and as we talk about hip hop politics, let's kind of go into this phase of it. I'm encouraged, and that's going to be one of my thrifts this evening. But I want to hear from everybody. I don't want to leave discouraged tonight, but I want to say that I'm encouraged because I'm encouraged by YG and Nipsey with F Donald Trump. I'm encouraged by when we were out there in the streets for Black Lives Matter. I would hear Kendrick saying, we gonna be all right. And that was an anthem. That became our gospel. That became our we shall overcome, right? And I'm encouraged because, compared to Black preachers, out there, a lot of, who aren't supposed to be capitalistic, there is a true capitalistic reign. So, even though you had, you didn't really have, everybody didn't jump ship to go to the side of capitalism. They were still, holding strong to the mission of the people, even more so than the progressive movement. And even, I think I saw so many people, nothing against, we saw with Lil Wayne with Trump, and then you saw, Senator Harris, going on the Breakfast Club, and you also saw that with Biden. We saw that, right? We saw them coming on for the first time into the arena of hip hop, talking about issues that affect us. But then when this is all over, we don't have that conversation about our issues from, legalizing marijuana to issues of, reentry and criminal justice, issues of environmental justice. They're talking about the issue that so many Black voters went up for Trump. So what happens there? I guess I'm just asking, what goes on? How do we go from what we see, the overall nature of our culture, fighting against white supremacy out there in the streets, doing something, laid on the line from young people out there and older people who are in the culture, to when the narrative is told, everybody come out, to some degree, what Ice Cube did, what Little Pump did, what Lil Wayne did, what Diddy did, that becomes the outline for the whole conversation. And then they overlook Rhapsody. They overlook all the powerful women who are in hip hop in that process. So tell me, Bree, what happens when the conversation from the political establishment goes into, well, Black voters, Black, and particularly Black voter men went for Trump, and they kind of they put so much on hip hop, but don't give nothing to it. So tell me, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it connects some to what Jason was touching on, right? And I do think that the concept of independent power is very important, right? And I think we have to be conscious about like the balance or the relationship between our power that we have as organized people and communities and the existing systems and structures. Because I think that a lot of times, I would argue that we almost disempower ourselves, or we cede a lot of power to existing systems and structures, right? And I think what goes hand in hand with that is ceding the narrative to existing systems and structures. So for example, right, we know that the president-elect would not have won without the mobilization of Black voters. I can tell you firsthand, if you talk to any, grassroots Black activists, they will tell you, like, a lot of that turnout, it operates in conjunction in some ways with the, Democratic Party establishment, but a lot of that is happening outside of that. It's not a coincidence, for instance, that you saw all of the turnout that you saw in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That is in part in response to the killing of Jacob Blake and people seeing how the Trump administration, tried to use the situation there to stoke more white supremacist violence. People were already protesting in the street, people were organizing themselves, and then they translate that into a mobilization around the ballot box to send a message in that way. That is a power that we have independent of the existing structure that we can direct how we want to direct. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that. So then when, the corporate media establishments or, whoever it is, mainstream media platforms that we tend to have limited access to, they tend to kind of decide what they want the narrative to be. One of the things that I found really interesting, kind of going to your point around, like, the focus on Lil Wayne and 50 Cent and Lil Pump and some of these other figures, there was clearly this narrative that mainstream media was really ready to seize upon around Black men in particular, right? And how Trump was peeling away Black men. And then kind of hand in hand with that goes with that is kind of like this narrative around, women, women, race neutral, kind of pushing back against Trump. And one of the things that I was pointing out was how that really is a scapegoat narrative. Like if you really think about it and you start to dissect it, right? Because it's really Black people. It's really Black people who voted the most against Trump, who sent the greatest repudiation of Trump. Irrespective of gender, that's really what you see when you peel away at those polls. And then what was fascinating about what happened with that narrative is that once that kind of became clear, once it became clear that this election was actually not going to be close, because part of the reason why it seemed like it was closer in the beginning was because of how Republicans had delayed the counting of the ballots. So early on, it seemed like, Trump was leading in Pennsylvania when he never was leading in Pennsylvania. It seemed like he was leading in the Electoral College when he was never really leading in the Electoral College. The ballots were just delayed. That's when we were getting a lot of the narrative around, like, well, how did Trump eat into the Black male vote? How did Trump eat into the Latino vote? When it became clear that Trump was about to get soundly defeated because of Black mobilization, then we stopped talking about, when I say we, I mean mainstream media. wanted to change the narrative and not talk about race. And if you pay attention, it's really been Black media outlets, Black journalists, Black folks online who have been checking that and making sure that people say what the truth is. I noticed online when Kamala Harris gave her acceptance speech and she made reference to Black women, she said Black women specifically were the backbone of democracy. And USA Today put out a tweet where they said, Kamala Harris said women are the backbone of democracy. And it was folks who had to call them out on that. So I think like being conscious of that kind of thing and recognizing like the power in telling our own narratives and why it's so crucial. Like, yes, we want to fight for, access to traditional outlets. I'm not telling folks not to do that, but we have to recognize the power that we have in our own outlets and taking control of our own narrative and not just ceding that to other folks,
No, that's important, Bree. No, and Marsha, on that note, because what Bree is saying is so important because that's actually hip hop, right? We control it. We tell our story. That's where we come from. And so for me, Marsha, I look at this moment, I was arrested fighting for justice during Bush, fighting the war, got arrested bad too. And then I got arrested. I was arrested early this year, fighting, against Trump, trying to push for climate finance and make a transition on the climate side. But I was also arrested in one of my moments. I was arrested at the White House with Obama, with Julian Bond, and so I was arrested. So it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican. I was because I'm hip hop. I'm not Democrat. I'm not Republican. Right. I'm post-partisan. So is it more important? Should we stay on the outside completely? Should we get an inside strategy? Should we tell our stories to be? Tell me, Marshall, where do we go from here on that point?
Well, I definitely want to answer that and springboard it with piggybacking off of Bree with the narrative that's being placed. We have to start, one, to answer your question, Reverend Yearwood, start, keeping political code and not allowing practitioners of white supremacy and practitioners of white entitlement to create our narrative and tell our story. And we, that's the first order of business to start getting some things done. And we most definitely need to consider being partisan and laying our demands out there. Just as Ice Cube did, you had people, that were in their feelings about what Ice Cube did. But when you're talking about politics, it's business, and Reverend Yearwood, you get it. We can't take in trustee board meeting protocol in dealing with politics and our issues, and you get that. So we present what we want and what we need, and we make our request and our demand, and whichever party is willing to give us our demand, then that's who we lift up. We can't be monolithic with just our vote. And I definitely believe we still have a better chance with the Democratic Party, but if that means us creating a hip hop party, if it means us creating our own third party, that's something that we need to strongly consider. But we don't need to continue voting emotionally. We have stake in the game. I mentioned, political equity. So, we have some chips. We definitely can yield some high return, and we should have some high return. We proved that with this election, that we carry a very powerful vote. I hate you can't see it, but I'm wearing a T-shirt that says "Voters Decide." When you're talking about environmental justice issues, when you're talking about great infrastructure, sidewalks, our streets, and our neighborhoods, that can be handled, with legislation. Politics is involved in that. You can have, T-SPLOS and E-SPLOS and things of that nature to build those things. When we're talking about our criminal justice system, just here in Georgia, we were able to flip and totally remove our mock Trump. You're fired in several cities and counties in Georgia, in Atlanta, and Brunswick, with Brother Ahmaud Arbery, just the protests and the rising up against imperialism, about the rogue officers abusing their power. We tossed that broad out of there. That was delaying that. We made a definitive statement that, we're getting involved, we're learning the political game, so to speak, because voting is just one tool in that toolkit. as far as our nonviolent toolkit, we have so many tools, and voting is one of those tools. And so we have to start using a multi-pronged approach, and ensuring that we receive equity in these moments. So, I mean, I know I gave off a lot. You look like you
you definitely know. That was actually on point. I think what we're in this conversation is the beginning, because I think what Hip Hop Caucus wants to do is definitely, we realize that a lot of emphasis is actually put on voting,
right?
But we gotta do more than that. And I check out. I'm gonna come back to you, Bree, but y'all just need to check out Bree's Twitter page. I don't know if she sleep at night, but she be tweeting. I don't know what she be. I be wondering how she get that tweeting in, but she get in there, boy. I don't know, boy. She be making it happen. Jason, man, how was the Black experience turned around and weaponized against the community in this election? And what impact? Because as Bree was mentioning, they want to tell our story, and we got to deal with that. But then they also try to turn our experience in us from things like defund the police or different things that where we was clearly fighting for our lives, but they want to turn that around and have a gymnastics around that. So from your standpoint, as a legal mind, as just somebody who's understanding from the culture, how would that use? How did we allow for them to use our Black experience to be turned against us?
Well, I think first it didn't work. I think that's the first thing we want to say and name is that we have been. I'm 37 years old. I don't know of a politics without dog whistles. And so. Donald Trump put down the dog whistle and picked up the bullhorn, and then he had, several Republican leaders, folks who condemned him during the Republican primary, who, are full in on Trumpism and all of what it entails. And so you're right. We are out in the street asking for public safety, demanding public safety, saying, our communities are over policed, over surveilled. We are at risk. And you don't have to believe our word. You can just turn on the TV and see that happening over and over and over again. And people around the country and around the world, of all races, colors, and creeds, said this is a serious problem. And of course you saw that turned into, we want you to defund the police. They want, rioting and looting all over your cities. Is this the kind of America you want to live in? And of course, even further than that, right? Matching the political violence with the policy violence, talking to white women in the suburbs and saying, if you vote for the Democrats and Joe Biden, your community won't be like it was before. At the same time, rolling back protections for racial integration, not just in the suburbs, but everywhere, right? So it's these same messages, right? These same dog whistles. Obviously, they're served up on a different platter, but we've seen them before. And they didn't work, and in large part they didn't work because Black folks in Atlanta and Philadelphia and Milwaukee and Chicago and in so many other places, we know what that is. We have a new generation of organizers that are reaching people in new ways. We have popular support on our side. I mean, when you look at some of these ballot measures that passed, 5 states legalizing marijuana either for adult recreational use or medical use. You had ballot measures, drug decriminalization ballot measures in Oregon. You had minimum wage, what I prefer to call living wage ballot measures in jurisdictions. You had jurisdictions that actually said about, actually reducing public safety and police budgets. And so, when you cut through all of that and really have those conversations that organizers are having in communities, really drawing people into the issues that they want government to be there for them, where they want government to show up for them, we have the winning message. And I think the challenge is, how do we break through, as Bree said, and Marcia said, right, and make sure we're the ones telling our narratives, not just one-to-one, but on, television platforms, on the radio, on podcasts, on the way that people consume. And so we can, disrupt and respond to those dog whistles or those bullhorns as they were, because that is inconsistent with what popular opinion is and what the public expects of our government.
No, thank you. Well, folks, I got one last question coming. We got another panel coming behind us, and we jump started a little late. Like I said, we had to overcome some pieces, but I'm glad. Like I said, I was just a reminder of what our community goes through, and so I want to kind of go back. This time, I'm going to go back through the line from Jason and Marcia, then end with you, Bree. And I want you, one, make sure when you end, make sure you let folks know how they can find you in your answer. Let folks know how to connect. And, we're going to continue this conversation because, the great thing about the culture that is all of us. It's black, white, brown, red, male, female, straight, gay, thieves, atheists, and everybody is in the culture. So that's actually the beautiful part about hip hop. So Jason, I want to end with you. I want you to answer this two-part question, really, really kind of like, where do we go from here? The first part, Nas made this comment, which was controversial back then, and he said hip hop is dead, right? And M1 and Stickman says, it's bigger than hip hop. But the question really is hip hop politics dead? And if not, what do we need to do for the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration? So is hip hop politics dead? Kind of a spin on that, if it is, why? If it's not, if it's on life support, the little pimp, little pump that they kill it. Whatever needs to happen in that regard, But if not, then let's get to the first 100 days. And it's going to go to all three of y'all. So is hip hop politics dead or is it bigger than hip hop? And then that first 100 days, what needs to happen? So Jason, let me go with you first.
I'll keep it brief. I'm going to say resoundingly no. And I'm going to say that because I feel like, the spirit of mutuality can't be killed. We take care of us. We see to ensure that our community is protected and safe. We do that, as Bree said, outside of institutions if we need to. We do it within them if we have the opportunity. But we don't leave each other and our community behind. So for me, that's what fuels the politics, and that's what's going to continue to make it enduring. Will it evolve and mold and take different shapes? Probably, likely. But I would definitely not say that hip hop politics is dead. I think that hip hop is a broadly expansive place. There are more places for more people in this politics than any other politics that we have. So it's necessary for us to figure out what we need to do. I think it's intergenerational. I see, so many folks, Gen Z, Zoomers, however you want to refer, really saying like, I'm not going to wait my turn. I'm going to utilize these platforms. I'm going to master digital organizing and advocacy. I'm going to iterate on top of what folks have done, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to do that because we have to start talking about the solutions of tomorrow instead of the solutions of yesterday. And I think hip hop is a wonderful space for that co-creation and politics to happen. And for me, the first 100 days, listen, like we're in the middle of a devastating pandemic. And we've had a government that has said, for the vast majority of people, we can lose you. You're not necessary. And so if our democracy means anything, if our social compact means anything, then in that first 100 days, we've got to define who's sitting at the lowest intersections of oppression. And we've got to figure out a relief plan and a way forward that lifts up those people. Because if we construct ourselves in our response there, then we can make sure that that tide will lift all of those boats. But it's a massive undertaking, and I think it's going to be the first test in, again, what kind of accountability framework have we built in order to, so that folks don't come back to us 3.5 years from now and say, save our democracy again, that we have fought for that seat at the table. We've demonstrated the power of our politics at a national level. We saved the country from itself, from its white supremacy, at least. So now, like, we'll have our first test in putting that into action. And I think, how we hold this incoming administration accountable for what COVID relief looks like is going to be a great way to have a bigger conversation about what they're going to do to build a real social safety net in this country, so that things like, so that we're not facing a massive eviction and homelessness crisis, so that we are not facing a depression and record unemployment when the next pandemic hits, whatever form or function it takes. And so thank you. You can find me at Jason E. Starr, JASONESTARR, on all of the platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's been real being with you.
Nah, thank you, Jason. That was what's up. Marsha, same question.
Well, a resounding no as far as hip hop politics being dead. It's just getting started, and just to lift it up more, we don't need any data. We don't need to try to figure out who's the lowest of oppression. That was established back in 1601. So we don't need to figure that out. We definitely, in the first 100 days, Biden's been vice president before, and they have an idea of where they want to go with COVID. He has to do a transition plan, and so COVID, I'm sure, we know that that's number one on the list for everyone. However, we also know that there are other special interests that he's had conversations about. If I recall correctly, I believe it was like October 29th. After the contract for Black America, that all of that came out, that within the first 100 days, he mentioned he was going to establish further civil rights for the LGBTQ community. And so we need to be in the first 75 days. And so that's, just, where that is. Like J. Starr has stated, we've proven that. We are the table. And so we need to facilitate those questions, those conversations with an ask, with something, in return. We more than deserve that. And there's no need for us to be shy about that. There's no need for us to, that's just a form of love that we would lift that up. So to help lift that up, I want to just go ahead and throw it out there in Georgia. Even though we were able to, get that sigh of relief, everyone was able to have that sigh of relief Saturday, as far as, I saw a meme, I thought it resonated. Hey, now it's back to polite racism, basically, okay? So we had that sigh of relief. It's time to get out there and work. We have to try to get control of the Senate. We have a runoff in Georgia. It's a very big runoff, and that is going to be on January 5th, the runoff in Georgia. And that's for the Senate seat with, we have 2 seats we're looking at. Racial equity and equity are always the candidates. So there are 2 Democratic seats that we really want to pay attention to. We want to get Georgia voters out. We have the Public Service Commission that will impact environmental justice issues, utility burdens. When you get those high rates with Georgia Power and your EMCs and your municipal-led utilities, with the Public Service Commission, we have a runoff that is going down on December 1st. So we need to check those things out. Those are the elected seats that establish and regulate utility bills. Now, like I said, we're we are the table, and hip hop is not dead in politics. It will continue to grow. We definitely have to get some legislation passed, and make sure equity is there. Make sure that we all just have a shoe, and that we all just have a hammer and the tools and the toolkits. We need the things that are gonna give us success and help us create success and allow us to win. We want the cheat code gone away with, as far as entitlement and all that great stuff. So to get in touch with me, check out the Partnership for Southern Equity. We're a Black-led nonprofit out of Georgia, and we work the American South, and we ensure racial equity. My email is mg as in gate, os as in supreme, IER @p as in partnership, s as in southern, equity, EQUITY.org. And so.
No, thank you. We appreciate that. And I know it's hard to, I know you was great, so you was getting close to who the vote was. Oh, you was keeping it now.
Hey.
You getting close.
You can switch that thing around.
Ask Jason some legal you get on that line though. You was
I got you.
I'm just gonna say both of us, and you was Georgia style. You stepped back.
Hey, that's what we do. We speak truth to power.
And let them go out there and decide for themselves. Bree is bigger than hip hop. Come on now, you know how we do it now. Listen, is hip hop politics dead, or is it bigger than hip hop? Where do we go from here, my sister? Community or chaos in the first 100 days?
Yes, absolutely not. I actually think this is one of the most fascinating times in politics with hip hop. There's a lot of really fascinating conversations going on around gender. You've got this rise of some really fierce feminine MCs, conversations around capitalism, conversations around class. And I think that hip hop has long been kind of like the crucible where a lot of those conversations play out in culture and fashion and music and discussion. So no, absolutely. I do not think that hip hop politics is dead at all. And I don't think that there would be so much focus on, hip hop artists in this moment if that were the case. As far as the first 100 days, I mean, I would echo a lot of what has already been said. I think obviously COVID is the number one public health crisis right now. I just saw where we hit 200,000 cases in 24 hours. I mean, it is astronomical, the outbreak that is occurring right now. I'm frankly frightened because we're not even at the peak at this point. And I think it's just really important that we understand when we're talking about a public health crisis, all the things that go into that. So that includes like what Starr was talking about with housing. We're looking at a mass eviction crisis in January if nothing is done to prevent it, because that CDC moratorium is going to run out. And then people are going to have, debts to pay because we never canceled rent. So I think that the first 100 days is going to have to look like an enormous response, probably it has to be bigger than what we got in 2008. The people need a bailout. We keep bailing out institutions, we keep bailing out corporations, we're bailing out everybody except the people who really need a bailout and who really need some relief right now. And so I think that has to be number one, is COVID response, healthcare access, ensuring safe, stable housing for everyone, and everything that can allow people to be safe in this moment as we are, waiting on a relief from this outbreak and this virus. And then beyond that, I think obviously addressing human rights and civil rights and voting rights has to be undertaken as well. There's been so much devastation to both voting rights and civil rights here in the past, 10 years or so. That has to be right behind it in terms of, what gets addressed. And I agree with what's been said as well, that we should not back away at all in terms of making our demands. This is not a time for compromise at all. What are we compromising on? Our lives? Why would we compromise on our lives and what we need in this moment? We can't do that for the sake of politics. And lastly, yes, I would encourage anyone, if you want to connect with me online, you can find me across social medias at Bree Newsome. I'm at Bree Newsome on Twitter, at Bree.Newsome on Instagram, and Bree Newsome Bass on Facebook. And please also check out whentheyseeusvote.com. This is a political education initiative that we are carrying out in the state of North Carolina, but it's a resource that's available for everyone. It's kind of like a model that you can either use to study yourself, use it as as a study group. If you want to make some modifications to it to use in your communities, wherever you are, that's fine. But we're really talking about how we build beyond this moment, right? Because it's got to be more than just going into the booth and casting a ballot. We have to build infrastructure in our communities. We have to really, and we've got to really focus in at a local level too. We tend to mobilize around the presidential election, but I think this is the situation that's going on in Georgia is a reminder that, all the power doesn't reside with the president. But all the power doesn't reside at the federal level either. A lot of these things that we're talking about, it's at the state and local level. We're dealing with policing, when we're dealing with housing and a lot of these other things, that's state and local level. So we've really got to, kind of broaden our understanding of what it means to build political power just years one day, in November. So whentheyseeusvote.com is another great place you can go to check it out.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Bree. Thank you, Marsha. Thank you, Jason. Thank y'all so much for being with us. We're going to go to panel 2, but let me just say this real quick before we dip. The Hip Hop Caucus is meant to be an open source, so we need you. It was created for that. So it was created to be that place where we can have this conversation, but it's only as strong as what you put into it. So I need some of y'all like Jason and Marsha and Bree, and many of y'all on the next panel and the other panels that are going to be. Take some leadership with the Hip Hop Caucus. This was created. Actually, it's some history behind it, how it was created. It was created for the people in hip hop, so we can have a place. Big shout out to Liz, our ED at the Hip Hop Caucus, and the whole team over there, both in the East Coast and over there on the West Coast, making it happen. Y'all worked hard, but let me say this, please go to hiphopcaucus.org, check that out, and definitely go to my vote. Hopefully we can do some things to help out, just make sure the vote gets out in Georgia, whatever we can do. And then for me, I'm the OG, but I still do a lot around issues of climate and climate change and environmentalism. So please check out my podcast at The Coolest Show. Folks like Bree's been on there and other folks have been on there, but it's an amazing platform that particularly looks at Black and brown and then people in the climate movement. So it's a great place to go to thecoolestshow.com. So anyways, y'all, I want to thank y'all for what y'all doing. We're going to go to our national organizer, I believe, Brandy, who is going to take it from there. But as we say in hip hop, can't stop, won't stop, all power to the people. Y'all stay encouraged.
What's up, everybody? As Rev said, my name is Brandy Williams. I am the national organizer for the 2020 Respect My Vote campaign. Excited to be here tonight. And thank you, Rev, Bree, Jason, and Marsha for getting us started with this very important conversation. Before we move into the second panel, we do have a video for you guys from Ian Mann. He's a hip hop violinist out of Miami, Florida. And he actually performed for several of our voter registration events earlier this election season. And y'all, he was so dope. So we're going to show this video for Ian and we'll come back with our panel. that was so dope. Again, that's Ian Mann, hip hop violinist out of Miami, Florida. And he actually was doing a cover of The Bigger Picture by Lil Baby, which is the conversation that we're having tonight. We started off the conversation with really analyzing what happened in the 2020 election, and we want to move to our second panel to talk a little bit about what's next. What's the bigger picture? Where do we go from here? And our first panelist kind of set us up for this next conversation, and I'm excited to bring on our panelists. We got a strong Black and Latino lady panel tonight, so we are doing what we always do: show up for the culture. So our first panelist is Aisha Kirkland. She goes by AK, and she is just 16, y'all. But when you hear her talk, you will never know that she was 16. She's an independent rapper and poet from Miami-Dade County, and she prioritizes making music that will uplift and inspire her generation. And she never lets anything confine her light, but lets it shine for all to see. She's more than an artist. She's also the founder of Youth for Christ 305 Plus, a Miami-based global network of Christian teenagers that has been striving in connecting, educating, and stirring up youth in their relationship with God. Our next guest is Carmen Perez Jordan, who has dedicated 20 years to advocating for many of today's important civil rights issues, including mass incarceration, gender equity, violence prevention, racial healing, and community policing. As the president and CEO of the Gathering for Justice, a nonprofit founded by legendary artist and activist Harry Belafonte, Carmen has crossed the globe promoting peace through civil and human rights, including building alternatives to incarceration and violence, and providing commentary and guidance for state and federal policy creation. Carmen is also one of the national co-chairs for the 2017 Women's March on Washington and the founder of the Justice League NYC and Justice League California. Her new favorite role is chasing around and being the mother of her two sons. So welcome to tonight's panel, AK and Carmen.
Thank you so much for having us. Hi, Brandy. Hi, AK.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi, good night, good night, good night.
How are you guys?
Working, grinding, continuing. But I will say it feels a little lighter than it has before. It felt really heavy these last 4 years. And so really excited to be here with all of you just to talk about what we need to do to continue to organize. This has been a long journey. And you will hear my 1 month old. He's in my arms right now. So, but I'm going to go ahead and give it up to AK to also share.
I'm doing great, and I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to be able to join Hip Hop Caucus in this discussion, and I'm excited about the things we're going to be talking about tonight.
Awesome. Well, let's start with what I consider a pretty easy question. How do you define hip hop politics? What does that mean to you?
Well, to start off with hip hop, Google would say it's a genre, but a real hip hop enthusiast will use this word culture. Hip hop is the soundtrack, more so the expression, the storybook of the lives of the individuals that go through things on a daily basis, such as their confessions, their struggles with oppression, yet the thing that keeps people uplifted during times some may face depression. And hip hop politics is the never ending effort to make sure that those individuals who are sharing the stories told in hip hop music, really in the hip hop culture, are not neglected, but are properly represented, their rights are respected, and that those individuals are attentive to their government.
Whew. Listen, I have chills right now, literally listening to you say that. So powerful.
AK, like, I just got to give it up to you. I got to bring my baby up here, but that was beautifully said, because, one of the things that I used to identify with, I didn't really know growing up that I was Chicana. I didn't know I was Mexican American. I didn't know I was part indigenous. But what I did know is I was hip hop and basketball, right? Hip hop was what connected me to community, what was connected me to struggle, what was connected me to identity. It was my identity, it was my culture. It's what allowed me to navigate in the world and feel like I had a home. And I think that's really what hip hop was for me. I listened to people like Miss Dynamite, who talked about the young people. She was a London rapper. I listened to folks like, I'm gonna age myself, AK, so please pardon me. But, my older brothers used to listen to NWA, and, I was able to listen to, this West Coast, East Coast rap. I learned a lot of my, just political analysis, as well as what we were going through as a community through hip hop, right? Language that I probably wasn't going to be exposed through in high school. But really, if I had a 4-year degree, and I remember, Wu-Tang and Method Man talking about cash rules everything around me, cream, get the money, dollar, dollar bill, y'all. And it was really talking about capitalism. And so for me, hip hop politics is an opportunity, right, to connect folks that are not necessarily connected to the broader political conversation. It's really going into the home, it's going into urban areas, it's going into Black and Latino communities, and persuading them and connecting them to something that's larger than themselves. The community that I grew up in didn't have folks that were graduating with PhDs, but they certainly were listening to hip hop. And so really hip hop is the vehicle, right, that allows us to connect to beyond our communities. And so really, I think, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Brandy, and with AK and Hip Hop Caucus. So grateful for TC Muhammad and everybody there, because, the way in which we connect to folks, right, whether it's the Harry Belafontes, is through music.
Yeah, definitely. It's the culture. I love the way that you guys, really brought that out, because I think that's extremely important. And I think a lot of times people who are of the culture don't necessarily see themselves in the political space. And so one powerful thing that I heard Rev say one time was just the fact that because we are here and we are in America and American, we are part of politics, right? So it can't happen without us. It can't happen without our voice. It can't happen without us being there. And in saying that, as we think about the culture of hip hop and the many perspectives in the culture, how do we also ensure that the full perspective of the culture is actually recognized? How do we make sure that the culture, the agenda of that broad range of people stays on the table? So, thinking about the fact that we're still talking about Flint, we're still dealing with police brutality, we're still dealing with environmental injustice. These are all things that are about us. How do we make sure that from a cultural perspective, people understand that that's us, and that we are actually in the room, literally and figuratively, when these conversations are being had, so we don't get left out of that conversation?
All right. So if we're now defining hip hop as a culture, it's on that culture to be seen. And the first thing I thought about when I got this question was, the process of assimilation. For example, when someone leaves their country of origin and they forsake some of their traditions to change and adapt to that new home. And, people could get an aspect of that culture, but because the person chose to assimilate, that culture wasn't seen. So as the hip hop culture, it is our job to be like Little Baby and show them the bigger picture, that it's not just about a lifestyle, an economic standing, or the noise made in the studio, but the same noise needs to be made in the street, by showing them the various aspects of our culture, not assimilating to fit in, by having no problems with standing out, because taking a stand has to start somewhere. And when it comes to our agendas, such as environmental justice, water and Flint, police brutality, among others that we're faced with, I believe that we really have to continue to stay involved. You know, you think about some of the protesting and things that were going on this year with police brutality and things like Blackout Tuesday. We were making a lot of noise on social media. You know, before the election, we were still making a lot of noise, but now that the officials are in office, that doesn't mean that we stop making that noise. You know, I believe that activism should not be treated like a trend, but more of a trial. We should not wear out fighting for our rights, but we should fight for appeals like a court until we get the verdict that we want to hear. And it's not just about voting for president, of course. It's about, you know, showing up in 2 years for midterms, staying involved, or like this generation likes to call it, keeping that same energy. We have to keep voting for the officials who pledge to fight for the issues we care about. And if they don't keep their promise, our ballot should not give them a chance to lie to us again.
Whoo, Jesus. I tell you.
Yes.
We
came to church. We came to church. You know, certainly I believe that hip hop and music and culture cannot be an afterthought. It needs to be integrated into everything that we do. We are cultured people, right? And oftentimes when we go into these institutions, they're whitewashed. And so we don't even feel connected to the types of institutions that are making decisions about our lives. You know, Mr. Belafonte talks about his mentor, Paul Robeson, who said, artists are the gatekeepers of truth, their civilization's radical voice. And so, and, you know, I also heard Reverend Yearwood talk about, you know, one of Mr. Belafonte's other quotes is like, when the movement is strong, the music is strong. And so we need to continue to invite artists to be at the table with us. One of my brothers, who is part of Justice League NYC, as well as the co-founder of Until Freedom, my son Lennon, is a hip hop artist. He's a raptivist, right? And he's able to go into spaces that I don't have access to. And so he's not just an activist, but he's also somebody in the hip hop game that is using his art to be a bridge between these types of communities. And so we can't take for granted, right? I think that in the next 100 days, right, of this presidency, that we need to make sure we have a cultural ambassador, that we have people who are coming into our communities, who are representing us, and that understand that we need to continue to, you know, make sure that not only the White House gets painted, right, black and brown, but that, you know, we have people in there that are speaking to our young folks, right, that are speaking and leveraging these platforms that are able to connect to a broader audience than what I think folks, I know that, you know, Joe Biden, prior to one of his speeches, I think he thought he was going to engage the Latino community by playing Despacito, right? Like he used a song in order to, you know, rile people up. And again, you know, Mr. B, you know, reminding us the value of having artists in the space, hip hop artists, rappers, and making sure that, you know, we create spaces that have our best interest. You're right, AK. It's not just about the 4-year cycle. We have to create avenues and platforms that allow us to vote and stand and be, and create opportunities for civic engagement beyond the 4 years election, right? And we also have to make sure that we groom and cultivate and support candidates like AK to run for office, right? This is not just about looking for other people to represent our communities. We are the people, you know, one of my boys, CJ, would always talk about, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And so like, let's make sure that we support those of us that are running for office, as well as, you know, cultivate the leadership and create pathways for, you know, I'm about to move out the way with somebody like AK, right? Like, I don't need to be constantly speaking or be sitting on these panels because the younger generation is on fire. Jason said it, right? They've already grabbed the baton. They don't need it passed to them, and they're doing great things. So certainly, you know, leveraging the access that we have to these communities and making sure that culture shows up everywhere.
So what I'm hearing from both you and AK as we talk about what it looks like, what the bigger picture is, what the next steps are. You said a lot about the responsibility being on us. I didn't hear much about us, waiting for someone else to give or to bequeath anything to us. It's a lot about how do we create pathways? How do we create the environment? How do we show up for ourselves and our community? So when thinking about that, and thinking about this entire year that has been, for lack of a better word, pretty crazy. What does it look like? How do we leverage the civil disobedience and the protest so that we keep people engaged as we move forward into where we're going with, our new elected officials, whatever that looks like from a federal, state, and local level?
Well, a lot of the energy and the protesting and civil disobedience, a lot of that energy came from a source, a plug, and basically how people were outraged because of what they saw on social media. People got mad seeing a police officer with his knee on a man's neck. People got mad seeing a young man jogging, losing his life. These little things ramped people up. So I think that it's our job as, the voices in hip hop, while we have the attention, while we have people listening, to let them know that the work is not finished. It goes back to it just not being a trend, but a trial where we're fighting for a verdict. So we got to remind them, hey, it's cool that you had all this energy then, but you got to maintain that, because we're still dealing with court cases and court verdicts. We're still fighting for justice. We still have these issues. So it's about making as much noise and keeping people's attention while we still have it, so they can maintain that energy they've been showing.
And definitely
Awesome.
agree with what AK is saying. I think, protest, civil disobedience is one of the tactics in the larger strategy, right? We need to, as individuals that are connected to organization, create pathways to harnessing that energy into political action, right? Into engagement. I certainly know that, representing the Gathering for Justice, we are committed to continuing to fight against police brutality. We want to make sure that there's our special prosecutors, on a local level. My baby's using the restroom. Oh my God, this is so hilarious. This is the life of a mother, right? A newborn. But we're gonna, and also working on criminal justice reform. There are organizations that are calling for this administration, for state officials to remove the 44,000 legal barriers, right, that impact people with convictions, to erase people's conviction after they've served their time, to ensure that a father who wants to coach a little league team is able to do so, because people are not full citizens. Some of them don't have the ability to vote, right? Because they're still either they're on parole, or because they have or they're currently incarcerated. As well as we know that 9 out of 10 people with the record don't re-offend, right? They go on with their lives. And in the state of California, the state keeps people who have convictions, it keeps their record for 99 years. Could you imagine that? Living with your mistake for the rest of your life. And we talk about second chances all the time, as well as, when I think about the Latino community, I'm currently the co-founder of a new platform called She Se Puede. And one of the things that we know is that Latinos voted for policies that impact our families, right? And our lives directly. We want better handling of COVID responses and recovery, including a broad legalization program and a moratorium on deportations to keep families together within the first 100 days. And moving forward, citizenship for the 11 million immigrants in this country, access to quality education and affordable healthcare. And so there are these demands that we have heard from our community. We know people have been organizing for quite some time. United We Dream, you know, the Gathering for Justice, Justice League NYC, Until Freedom, Dream Defenders. There are so many folks that have been organizing around these issues, Californians for Safety and Justice. And so we just got to keep pushing our agenda and really building a solid Black and brown hip hop agenda, right, to go with it.
It's actually, you know, funny that you talk about a hip hop agenda, because we talked about that as a team in terms of what does that look like for us. I think, you know, it raises us or gives us an opportunity to kind of go up and talk a little bit about, you know, we've talked about we being able to hold elected officials accountable and staying a part of the process, but as organizers, as people that are leading this grassroots work and doing the work at all levels, what does that look like for us? How do we keep people that showed up at the polls engaged so that they make it to the midterm, so that they start to understand the interconnectedness of local, state, and federal policy, so that they know who they should be holding accountable? How do we do that?
Firstly, we really got to make sure that they are educated. And it starts with like what we're doing right now, holding dialogues. You know, people go show up at the polls and they don't even know the jobs that the elected officials they put in office have. You know, complaints will arise like, you know, we had a Black president, he didn't do anything for the Black community, but no one will ask how hard did we vote at those midterms to give him the seats that he needed to push his agendas. Not only do we need to make sure that they're educated about how it works, you know, with the forms of government, it being a team with not just the executive branch, but the legislative and judicial, et cetera. But we need to make sure that they stay informed. You know, sadly, we live in a generation where people are too busy or time consumed to sit down and watch C-SPAN all day long. Like, no, a lot of people don't have time to sit down and watch the congressional hearings, watch the decisions being made. For the most part, they just find out about it from a news headline. So we need to have our own platforms, kind of like what Sean Diddy Combs did with Revolt and what Hip Hop Caucus does, where we make sure people are informed about what their government is currently doing, so we could truly know if those officials are doing what they said they would do.
And
That's real.
Another person that really allows for these type of conversations that are, you know, digestible is somebody like Roland Martin as well, right? Who really brings the information to your living room. But you're right. I think, first of all, we have to remind people of their power. We have to remind people that they're the ones that put these individuals in office. And how do we harness that energy? Certainly educating them on propositions, referendums, you know, local DA races, right? Giving them the opportunity to really show up, but also understanding what skill do they have? You know, the work that we do in Justice League, one of the things that we have been able to really build is community, you know, harnessing the power and the skill set of individuals. You know, we have people who can put videos together, who know how to post on social media, who know how to do memes. You know, it's not just about giving them and telling them what to do. It's also understanding what they could do and share and bring, you know, to the movement. And I certainly feel that there's a lane for everybody, right? People communicate in their own ways, but certainly it's making things accessible. We often have these types of conversations. Mr. Belafonte talks a lot about preaching to the choir. He says you got to preach to the choir to keep them singing. But certainly, how do we meet people who are not part of the choir, who are not in these spaces? Door knocking. I know under COVID, we have to make sure that we follow COVID regulations. But again, you know, when we protest, when we go out into the streets, when we are marching, we make sure that we inform people what we're marching for, right? So not just marching for the sake of marching, but really developing demands that are digestible, and not just for the people that are showing up, but but for the elected officials that we're holding accountable, they also need to know why they're being held accountable. It's not just about us saying, oh, hoorah, hoorah, this is what we're marching for, and they have no idea, but also, you know, using different tactics. There's an inside-outside game that could be played very well, right? Is having folks that are part of the decision-making process, having meetings with your elected officials, developing relationships with them, making sure that they know what your agenda is and what your stance is. And if they don't move, right, then you're going to hold them accountable, because somebody said there aren't permanent friends, there are just permanent interests, right? And so it's making sure that we are advocating for our communities, but also giving the people back their power to advocate for themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that actually is, you know, one of our goals for tonight is to help people understand that there are no permanent friends, they're just permanent interests. And we have to make sure that we're always about the interest of our people and our community. And what does that look like, right? So, you know, just listening to you and AK, that looks like us not being afraid to stand up for hip hop, not being afraid to be hip hop, to leverage the power of how the culture started, to be able to tell our stories and share our experiences in a way that leads to change, so that we're not just sharing them so people can say, oh, that's nice, but for us to share them so that we see success and we see change for our people, but also making sure we're educated, making sure that we understand exactly what we're voting for, who we're voting for, and that our interests are being held, are on the table when they go into the room. And so, speaking about our interests being on the table, as you know, the whole world has been focused on the final results of the election, and now we're focused on what's happening in Georgia, and especially with this upcoming Senate runoff. You know, tragedy struck early Friday morning when hip hop artist King Von was killed. There aren't right now, or even then when it happened, any major news outlets talking about this tragedy. That fact alone shows that there's a disconnect between the political process and our daily lives. And so it makes you think that you know, a change in president and who's living in the White House is so far removed from where we are, and does that really matter? So let's talk about this disconnect. What are the disconnects between the political process and our everyday lives?
All right. To rip apart those disconnects, I think we have to start off with perspectives. And I want to work a little bit with that King Von situation to elaborate on what I mean. So if we look at someone's political perspective, as someone in office right now, to them, King Von may be seen as another statistic, another victim of gun violence that they will use as they dispute over gun laws in the Capitol. But rather, many in their everyday life see King Von as a reminder that they could be in the same position. I asked a couple of young gentlemen before I got on here, how did the King Von situation make you feel? And they expressed to me, young African-American men, that it made them sad. It made them feel like they were not safe. And some of them alone have several people in their neighborhood who died the same way King Von did. Meanwhile, there's only one Obama that motivates them that they could be a Black president. It's on both those in politics and those every day to have conversations that open up these perspectives, because things like our families, our origins, our histories, and our neighborhoods change the way we think. It changed the way we prioritize. The thing that's important to hip hop might not be the same issues important to the people who are currently holding those offices. So we have to sit down and have discussions and see, you know, what are each other's perspectives are, so we could try to bridge the gap in those disconnections.
And it goes back to what you were saying, Brandy, like, what is the hip hop agenda, right? What are we bringing to the table? And with Barack Obama, what happened was, with former President Barack Obama, what happened was that we fell asleep, right? The movement got really comfortable with him being in office. We thought that he was gonna go in, he was gonna make sure to push a Black agenda. But unfortunately, we were working every single day, not realizing that he needed us to make him do it, right? Again, the stories of Harry Belafonte are so instrumental when I think about strategy, because Mr. Belafonte talked about meeting with presidents in the past, and one of them saying to him during the civil rights movement, make me do it. And so that changed up their whole strategy, where they were on the streets. They were also having that inside outside game. But to AK's point, it's the fact that, you know, all young people, you know, when we go out into the streets, when my husband is driving, there's a fear, right? But there's a disconnect to who has been in office these last 4 years. He's not interested in our issues. And it's because what we need to do is we need to make sure that not only are we getting an assessment or an evaluation of what our people on the ground truly need, but we need to create open channels of communication with this administration that's going in. And I think that there's an opportunity there with folks like Hip Hop Caucus, right, who have access, who have been part of these conversations for quite some time. I know that there are certain hip hop artists right now that are connected to the current Black Lives Matter movement. I know that they certainly have access, but really what they need to be doing is they need to be listening and talking to the people who are part of these conversations, who are working directly with those that are impacted by the issues that affect us, like incarceration, you know, school inequity, climate injustice, all these different things, is that we need to create a bridge between our community and the White House.
Absolutely. I love that. We need to create a bridge between our community and the White House. And one of the things I was going to ask next is, you know, well, what are we holding them accountable for? You started talking about that a little bit, Carmen, when you talked about holding them accountable for environmental justice, for the systemic racism, and police brutality. But what are some other things that we should be holding the people that we just elected accountable for? What are the things that we need to make them do, using what that former president told Mr. Belafonte?
It's definitely about making sure that our rights are preserved. You know, as you mentioned, some of the things like environmental justice and systematic racism. You think about it, America as a representative government. So if we want to steal quotes from John Locke and say we have unalienable rights like life, liberty, and property, then we need to make sure we hold our elected officials accountable for locking down our fair share of our pursuit of happiness. You know, we're not satisfied with the way some people are treated over others in certain institutions. We're not satisfied that some certain neighborhoods are more disadvantaged to environmental injustice. And mostly we're not satisfied that some people get to have their voice heard more just because of who they are. We want everybody's rights to be equal. You know, we want everybody to get the same fair treatment. We the people, not just the white men that sat down and create the Constitution, but we the people, being the people who are present today, all races, all genders, heard in their government.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I also feel that what we're holding them accountable to is to make sure that within their first 100 days that they reunite the 545 children that have gone missing, that are not with their families. And also what I feel is that they need to re-energize our community, get us excited about some of the policies that they're going to be pushing, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's making sure that we create a federal mandate on system accountability, whether it's police accountability or criminal justice. So there are so many things that I think many of us who have been working in our own lane can now make sure that we are holding, not only in our organizations, but as a collective movement, right? Black Lives Matter has a set of demands that I think are comprehensive, as well as other organizations. What does it look like to allow women to make decisions about their own bodies, right? What does it look like to have pay equity, right, in our workforce? What does it look like to ensure that companies aren't dumping poison in our backyards or using poisonous pesticides in our communities that is causing cancer. So making sure that as they enter their first 100 days, that we are keeping our eyes on the prize, that we are continuing to work hard in our lane, but that we are actually having conversations with them. Who are they nominating from our community? Who are they electing or bringing into that administration from their community to, from our communities to actually push some of these policies that are gonna impact us? One of the things that I will say is that we live in a very binary lens, right? Oftentimes you look at elected officials not necessarily speaking to the whole community. And what this new administration said is that they were going to be a president for all America. So what does that look like? What does your picture of America look like? And who is asking those questions? And I think there's an opportunity here for the hip hop community to begin to ask those questions and ask them in a way where they're going to be answered, not just, hushed away. I think oftentimes, again, this time I do have faith and I do have confidence that our communities are not falling asleep. We are a very different movement. We are a strong movement. We are an energized movement. It was because Black women and Black people showed up that we were able to, win this election. I know this is a bipartisan, but I will say that, again, I'm able to at least get one night's sleep knowing that we have better people who are coming into office, but we just got to make sure that we have those of us that have been organizing every single day, not just fall asleep, but to show up as well on their first day of work, because it's also work for us.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely also work for us. So before we close, I want to give both of you an opportunity to share any final thoughts and also how people can connect with you, as you just said, because we can't fall asleep. So we need to be connected to the people that are doing the work, so we know exactly where we need to be working and how we need to be supporting the hip hop agenda.
All right. Well, again, my name is Aisha Kirkland. I'm better known as AK. And if you want to connect with me, you could reach out to me on Instagram at Kirkland at Work. That's KirklandAtWork. And my last words, if I could leave a final words, is when it comes to us in this new phase, we entered a new political season with this election. As mentioned earlier, she stated that President Biden said that President-elect Biden rather, one of his agendas is to be a president of all people. He's talking about stuff like unity. And even we spoke about building a bridge from hip hop to the White House. And, the number one way to connect people, and I know we're talking about all this political stuff, but one of the things I just want to remind everybody is before we get into the politics, we're all basing this stuff on being human and human issues. And one of the things we really need to remember as humans is how to love. My encouragement for tonight is don't forget how to love. Love not in essence of, like the Bible says, not loving in word, but really loving in deed and truth. Love has the ability to be the bond of perfectness. And you think about, the story of the Good Samaritan, how a man was suffering, he was bleeding, he was bruised, and somebody, a minister passed him by, a priest passed him by, but somebody who was of a different race, a different religion, was willing to stop, take care of his wounds. And, that's how we may feel as a people. We may feel like we're hurting. We may feel like someone should stop. And everybody's so focused on their own thing that they're pushing their own agendas and they're not stopping to hear us out. But if we could learn how to be human first, if we could learn how to love people, not with just our words, but with our actions, seeing them in a place where they're hurting, seeing them in a place where they need help, even though we're not going through the same pain, even though we're not going through the same trouble, love says, I'm going to stop and I'm going to hear this person out. I'm going to help them in that situation. And when we love on people first, we open up their ears to listen to us. And same thing, I believe that, if the people in office would learn how to love on us as a people, even though they're not going through the same issues we're going through, that will be the way we build the bridge from hip hop to the White House. That'll be the way we build the bridge through all people in our country. So remember to love. Thank you guys so much for this opportunity to be here tonight.
I definitely love that. And I'm so grateful again for this opportunity for Hip Hop Caucus, bringing us together for this important conversation. I was able to listen to people like Jason and Bree Newsome and folks that were speaking earlier, Reverend Yearwood. And I think, my name is Carmen Perez Jordan. I am, you could follow me at MS Lady Justice 1 on Instagram and Twitter, as well as follow the work that I do at Gather Number 4 Justice, Instagram, Twitter, as well as NY Justice League, and she se puede, which is she_se puede. But I think there's a real opportunity right here, right now, especially with all of us who have been doing this work for quite some time. I feel like our movement is a lot more mature than what we were a couple years ago. And to your point, I think it's true, meeting people with love is certainly a tactic, right? And an ideology and a strength that allows us to actually go beyond our ego. If the president-elect is gonna be uniting this country, what does that actually look like? But I just want to talk to all of you that are watching. There's a lane for you, right? What is your gift? Bring that to the cause. Volunteer at local organizations. Show up. We need you. The reason why we are entering entering into the new year with a new president is because of you. It's because you made it happen. And we're going to need you to continue to show up. We're going to need to continue to hear from you, to know what your issues are. We want to understand what your issues are. And I think we really need to focus on a hip hop agenda. I was thinking a lot about, why are there two parties? What in the world, right? How is it that we all vote for two parties, whether it's the conservative party or what people identify as the left? It's just really interesting to me. And I think we need to begin to question those structures that have been set up way before we came into this earth. I know that I certainly was not part of that creation, but a part of the way in which we build new life or new opportunity is by dismantling some of the systems that no longer work for us. And so I want to thank you, Brandy, for this conversation, as well as AK. I think it's such an honor to be here with all of you, and I look forward to continuing this conversation even off of here and maybe on our social media, but looking forward to continuing to build with all of you.
Well, thank you both for joining us for this panel and for your contributions. You both said some things that will definitely have me thinking. What you said just now, Carmen, thinking about, how we need to shake up the structure, what that looks like, because we shouldn't just be voting for one or the other, right? Again, we talked about how hip hop isn't monolithic. The country isn't monolithic. So that means that we need to make sure that we're being properly represented. And I think that's a lot of the reason that we see ourselves often saying we're choosing between two evils, the lesser of two evils, because we don't have and we have not thought about how we shake up that structure so we're getting true representation for all people. So I appreciate that. That was extremely thoughtful. Before we end, I do want to, make sure that that anyone in Georgia, if you have friends in Georgia, that get out your pen and paper so that you can write this down. If you were not registered to vote in the 2020 election, you can still register to vote in the runoff election in Georgia for the Senate on January 5th. The 2 U.S. Senate races are headed to a runoff. And we need to make sure that we show up the same way that we did for the presidential election for this runoff election in Georgia. Absentee ballots go out November 18th. That's actually in like a week. The December 7th is the deadline to register. So if you have not registered, today is a little too late unless you go request your absentee ballot today. But looking forward to tomorrow, whatever you need to do, make sure you get registered to vote before that December 7th deadline. December 14th, early voting in person begins, and January 5th is the actual election runoff day. The law says if you will be 18 years old by election day, which is January 5th, then you can vote. So if you are in Georgia and you're 17 right now, but you will be 18 before January 5th, go ahead and register and make sure you get out to vote. One final thing, Carmen talked about the rights of returning citizens and how important that is. When you think about who's able to vote and disenfranchisement and who's usually not able to vote because of disenfranchisement, those people usually look like us, right? So we need to make sure that we continue to support getting the rights for returning citizens. And so we have a petition. You can go to hiphopcaucus.org to sign that petition. We're close to 100,000 signatures. We'd love to add your name so you can help us get to 100,000 signatures. Please go to hiphopcaucus.org. Sign the petition, share it with your friends and in your networks. Go to our Facebook page. We'll have tonight's town hall posted. Please share that as well. And any and everything that you learned tonight, please continue to share. Stay connected to the process. Stay connected to the panelists from both the first and second panel. Stay connected to the Hip Hop Caucus, because we're going to continue to share and support how you can make your voice heard, not just during election season, but as we talked about tonight, every single day between now and the next election, whenever that may be. So thank you all. Good. In the words of Russell Simmons, God bless you. Good night.